Hi, welcome back to my channel. That was like super energetic, and I'm glad that I can be energized for you all. In the year of 2020, first off, bravo, we all made it through. Congratulations. Let's kick butt in 2021. Positive vibes only, am I right? In the year of 2020, I changed my reading goal a few different times with how many books I wanted to read, and every single time I changed it, I was always upping the number. Originally, I started out only wanting to read 100 books, and by the end, I set my goal at 200 books. And so the first thing I'm going to say is that in the month of December, for me to have read 200 books, I needed to read, editing Manda here from the couch. I actually did the math wrong. I needed to read 24 books. Somehow I forgot to count / talk about one for the month, but it was counted in my yearly goal. So I will just put some information about my thoughts and opinions on it down below because it's not super important and I don't feel like talking about it now. 23 books. Yeah, in 31 days, I needed to read 23 books. And so I guess the biggest question of this video is, was I able to do it? And ladies and gents, yes, I was. I finished on December 30th. I finished my 200th book. I had to read a few novellas to get there, but a book is a book and it counts. And I'm so happy that I managed to do it. I was overwhelmed and thrilled and aghast, and I'm never doing it again. Flat out never doing it again. It was so much reading and so much. Every day I had to think about the challenge and try to accomplish the challenge. I mean, there were 366 days in the year, and boy, was it a long one. I managed to do it though, and I'm now going to be talking to you about the 23 books that I read in December. Really quickly, let me start out by saying I did DNF one book, and that was The Thief. I don't remember who it's by. I didn't like it. I couldn't get into it. I don't love the formatting of the main character telling you what's happening throughout the story. Like, they're talking not necessarily to you in the second person perspective, but in like the first person perspective where they're kind of explaining everything that's going on. And I listened to, I think, about 25% of it, and the plot still hadn't started. Like, they were holding these secrets from the main character. He was broken out of prison so that he could commit a heist, I believe, is what they were eventually going to do, but no one would tell him why he was broken out of prison, for what reason, for what crime or heist or con that he was going to pull. And at 25%, they still weren't telling him, and I was getting so frustrated, I just quit. I quit. And then I started, but was not able to finish Malice by John Gwynne. I simply just didn't have enough time to finish it. / once I got to 200 books, I was like, I'm taking a day off. I didn't read anything on the 31st of December. It was nice. It was an enjoyable day. I really missed reading and came right back to it January 1st. But I haven't picked this one up again in January. As of right now, it's January 3rd. So I will be reading it in January. You can check out my TBR somewhere on the screen where I'll talk more about that. And of course, I'll talk more about it in my vlogs throughout the month as that goes on. Let's start at the top of the month and work our way down like I always do. So the first I'll start with those two. So the first two books that I read were Who Fears Death and The Starless Sea, which were both for my book club picks. I have the Discord link down below if you would like to join or have any comments, questions, concerns, whatever. So I actually tabbed both of them, and I had very, very different opinions about them. So Who Fears Death was the first one that I read for the month, and I struggled through most of it. I have read Binti, which is by the same author, and I didn't like Binti. I rated it 2 stars. I felt like the moral of the story was really powerful, but the writing just didn't click with me. And I even liked the main character and the culture in Binti, but this isn't a review about Binti. This is a review about Who Fears Death. It felt pretty similarly through most of Who Fears Death, where I felt like the moral of the story was extremely important. This idea of racism is wrong, of course, is one of the main morals, but also women can do what they want and women should be able to have control over their own bodies, and how disgusting men can be towards women, even underage women, even girls of 11 years old. And even fathers and brothers and cousins and non-family members. I felt like all of that was extremely important, but the writing style was not for me. I think that it reminded me a little bit of The Tiger's Daughter, although I enjoyed The Tiger's Daughter more, which is interesting because they both are letter format and you don't totally get that connection until a little way into this book, but it is in letter format where someone is writing to you about themselves, so it's not in the second person perspective. The ending, though, was really what did it for me in this book. I thought it was disgusting, and I felt like it undid a lot of the good that the author had said with women's body anatomy. That's not the word. I can't ever pronounce that word. Where women have control over their own bodies. I felt like she undid a lot of that. And maybe she was trying to prove a point, but I thought it was disgusting and gross and I didn't like it. And I ended up rating the book after struggling with it for many days 1 star. That's where I stand with this. I think it wasn't a bad book. I think I would recommend other people read it, but I myself did not like it. Goodbye. And then The Starless Sea was a reread. I actually read this earlier this year, so I'm not going to talk about it. I read it the first time, rated it 5 stars. I rated it the second time 5 stars. I love it. It's such a good book. I really like the writing. I really like the plot. I really like the characters. Okay, moving on. Let's stick this bad boy up here. So in between those two, I actually did listen to the audiobook for Ready Player 2, which is exciting because I re-listened to Ready Player 1 last month and I talked about it in my wrap up and I really enjoyed it. I think I actually enjoyed it a little bit more than the first time, maybe right around the same level, but for different reasons. And then Ready Player 2 sucked ass. It was so bad. And it wasn't that it was bad throughout the entire book. Like, through most of the book, I felt like a general, like, okay, this was unnecessary, but, like, it's not the worst thing I've ever read. But the ending was awful. And I will not be spoiling what the ending is, but I hated it. I hated it so much. I was listening to the audiobook the last like 10 minutes on my drive home from work and I was screaming. I drive home on the interstate and I was sitting there gripping the steering wheel screaming on the interstate as the ending of the book was happening. And I don't think I've had that experience really with any other book. So I ended up rating it 2 out of 5 stars. I also did have to skip a few chapters just because they were so boring. And it was mostly the chapters in the beginning where they were telling us what happened between book 1 and book 2. Once we got to the actual competition part, I was way more into it. But it just wasn't the same. It was dragged out and it wasn't as good as the first one. And they could have stopped at number 1. I'm doing a really bad job explaining what these books are about, but that's okay. So the next book I read was Graveyard Shifts and Other Short Stories by Stephen King. I did a whole video on this, so I don't need to talk about it here, but I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars, although each of the individual stories I have different ratings for. So for Graveyard Shift, I rated it 4 stars. For The Man Who Loved Flowers, I rated it 3 stars. For The Last Rung on the Ladder, I rated it 3.5 stars. For Night Surf, I rated it 2 stars. And for Jerusalem's Lot, I rated it 1 star. So in all, the total works got an average of 3 stars. I think it was actually like 2.7, but I rounded it up to 3 because I really enjoyed Night Shift and The Last Rung on the Ladder. Next, I read Carrie, also by Stephen King, and this is a shorter work. I mean, short for me. It was probably like 300 pages about this girl who was born with these telekinetic powers and she is mocked and made fun of and bullied at school, and she's just kind of an average high schooler growing up in the 1980s and dealing with peer pressure, yet she also has these weird abilities. Most people have probably learned about what Carrie is about through the movie or through pop culture or through the book themselves. I kind of went into it really not knowing what it was about, which was interesting, but I really enjoyed it. I wasn't enjoying it in the beginning and I almost DNF'd it, but I stuck with it and I'm really glad I did because it was enjoyable. It wasn't like the greatest thing ever. It won't be making it on my list of favorite Stephen King books anytime soon, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. By the end, I was really attached to the characters and this world that King had built. My biggest issue with it, of course, goes back to the sexist, misogynistic, and racist themes that King seems to have in a lot of his books. So I ended up rating it a 3 out of 5 star. Pretty solid book. Next, I picked back up Avant-Parthe, which I started a few months ago and put on pause and have been slowly making my way through it. So this is a book by Michael J. Sullivan, which I have been reading through all of his works this year. I haven't finished. I'll be continuing on in 2021. Avant-Parthe is book 2 in the Raya series. I also read book 3 later in the month, so I will talk about them at the same time. Avanpartha I put on pause a few months ago, and I've been slowly struggling to get through it. I really didn't like it, and I was kind of conflicted because book 1 I had rated 5 out of 5 stars, and I loved it. But book 2 just, it just didn't do it for me, and I ended up rating it 2, 3. I ended up rating it somewhere between a 2 and 3 star. Honestly, this is one of the few books that I feel like I couldn't accurately rate because I felt like I was part of the issue. So I gave it a 3 on Goodreads, but I think I wrote in the review that it was closer to like a 2.5, maybe a 2 star. Nephron's Rising is the 3rd book, and I also read that this month, and it just continues on with the story of these 2 bandits who, they're not really bandits, mercenaries, who do these like crazy, cool, impossible missions. And I think the reason why I didn't love book 2 is there was no crazy, cool, impossible mission. There was like a mediocre, somewhat impossible mission that I just couldn't get into. And then book 3 we did pick up where there was a lot more interest in what they were doing. And what's really cool is even though these are much shorter works, I think the audiobooks are like 10 hours each, they have multiple POVs and you get to see a broad, it's like an epic tale, but for like a shorter work. You get to see not only the 2 guys that we're following, but also like the princess in this one land, and then you get to see their enemies like discussing political intrigue plots from like a different area, and it's really interesting. And so book 3 picked up, and I was just much more interested in it for some reason, so I ended up rating it a 4 out of 5 star. After that, I read A Sky Beyond the Storm, which is the 4th and final book in the Ember and the Ashes series by Saba Tahir. If you don't know what these books are about, I reread them this year, and I talk about them a few different places on my channel, so I'll try to link where they are at. But I didn't love this one as much as I loved book 1 and 2. 2 is my favorite. I love it so much. I love Helene. Book 3 really didn't do it for me, and book 4 through most of it didn't do it for me, but the ending was nice and I enjoyed it, and I'm not going to say much about it because it's the 4th book in the series, but I ended up rating it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So I liked it more than the 3rd book, but less than the 1st book. Next, I buddy read with a dear friend Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie I've never said her name out loud. Maniscalco. And what's really interesting, I did vlog a lot about me reading this book, so I'll try to remember to link that somewhere. God, I'm going to be linking so many different things in this video. The world that this takes place in is based on Sicily, Italy, which is where my grandfather was born and raised for part of his childhood. And so it was really interesting because a lot of the world building and the culture I could relate directly to because I could see it directly impact from my life and from my childhood and from growing up in an Italian, specifically Sicilian family. This is a book where we are following this girl named Amelia, and really early on in the book, her twin sister dies and she strikes a deal with a prince of hell to try to track down her sister's murderer. And dynamic between the 2 of them is not quite what I thought it was going to be. It is very stereotypical YA fantasy. Like, I feel like if you have read any YA fantasy, you know what you're getting into with this book. There's not going to be anything special between like the 2 main characters. But what was interesting and what was different for me was that each of the princes of hell embody a different one of the 7 deadly sins, and the main prince that we are following, while yes, she like calls him to come and help her, he really doesn't play a huge role in the book like I thought he was going to. So I enjoyed it. I think that it was a really good book and I liked it a lot, and I was kind of shocked by how much I liked it. So I ended up rating it a 4.25 out of 5 stars because it really, to me, felt like it wasn't a 4 star, but in no way was it a 4.5, which is hard to rate. Next, I read The Lives of Saints, which I received from NetGalley. Thank you, NetGalley and Macmillan Audio, for providing me a free copy of this book in exchange for an honest review. So I did have like a more detailed review on Goodreads, but I will quickly explain to you. This is another novella in the, I guess it's in the Grisha world because it doesn't necessarily go with just Shadow and Bone. There are a few things that relate to Six of Crows as well, but it's in that world, and it's some really short stories about the lives of saints. And I think if you're like a big fan of Leigh Bardugo's works, you'll enjoy it. If you've read you don't need to read all of Shadow and Bone, but I recommend reading all of Shadow and Bone before you start this one. If you enjoyed Language of Thorns, you're probably going to enjoy this one. I've read both of them now, and I can't remember which one I enjoyed more. It might have been Language of Thorns just because I got to see the illustrations in that one. And since I was listening to Lives of Saints, I didn't get to see the illustrations. So that was a little bit of a disappointment. But Ben Barnes was one of the narrators, and I love him, and his voice was superb, immaculate. So, I mean, it was good. I didn't regret listening to the audiobook, but I wish I could have had the physical book alongside it. And I definitely have my eye on buying it because I have what I keep looking at behind me is a little Leigh Bardugo collection right here, and I like it a lot. Although Shadow and Bone is not near her. I ended up rating it a 4-star. Next, I read Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This was the final book that I needed to read by him because I've been slowly reading through all of his works, and so this one takes place in an alternate reality, historical fantasy. Was it Civil War times? What's really interesting about P. Djeli Clark's works is that while it takes place in the past, there's lots of futuristic elements, and it's really kind of a cool combination, but I just couldn't get into this one. I couldn't enjoy myself. So we're following this main woman who is a monster hunter, and so the monsters take the form of Ku Klux Klan members, and so they're called the Ku Klux Monsters. And I really loved that analogy and the world that P. Djeli Clark had built, but I could not enjoy the characters. I didn't like the main character. I didn't like her story. I didn't connect to her. And I don't think I was the right person to connect to her, but also stories are universal and they should be able to be widely reached. Anyways, for my own personal rating, because ratings are always personal, I rated it a 2 out of 5 star. Next, I read The June Boys, which was another arc, so thanks to NetGalley for providing this one to me. And this is the story of this serial kidnapper who every other year kidnaps 3 boys in this area, holds them for a year, and then releases them. But this year something different happened. He kidnapped 4 boys, and then one of them showed up dead. And we are following the main character who her cousin, I believe, or was her brother, was kidnapped. And she is trying to connect the clues, figure it out, and save him because she's worried that now that this one boy has shown up dead, that something might happen to the other 3 that are taken over this year. That all sounds great and interesting, but the book itself really wasn't like super great and interesting. The beginning part had these letters that were based off of real letters from a kidnapped victim, and those were really interesting. I had no problem with those because I know I say a lot that I have issues with letter format in books. As I said at the beginning of this video, I don't really like letter books, but when they're like short like that at the beginning of a chapter, I don't mind them. I just really couldn't get into this book, and I don't know what like was blocking me from loving it, to be honest, but maybe it was the writing. I don't know. I'm still like kind of confused about why I didn't like this book at all. I ended up rating it a 2 out of 5 star. Next, I picked up Thorn. I just hit myself in the face with that book by Intisar Kanani. So I read Sunbolt earlier this year, freaking loved it, added it to my favorites list. So I bought all of her other works, which is just Memory of Ash, which is the sequel to Sunbolt, and then this one. And I'm waiting because there is a sequel to this, although what's going to be interesting is they are going to be standalone novels, so you don't need to have read Thorn to read Brambles. What is it? Oh, I don't remember the title of the sequel, but they're not connected at all. They're just both by the same author and both kind of retelling stories. So I went to this one a little bit hesitant because I myself am not a huge fan of retellings, but this is a retelling of The Goose Girl, which I am not familiar with at all. So I thought it would be fine. And I love the author's writing, so I thought it'd be fine. And I know that this author tends to do stuff that's kind of unexpected and not traditional writing of plots. Don't know how else to say that. So I went into this kind of hesitant, but also like knowing that Intisar Kanani like had me in her hands, and her hands were hands that had fed me before. That's not anything that people say. Anyways, I ended up freaking loving this. I loved it. It felt like everything that YA should be. It was so fresh and so new. And yeah, there were things that were predictable and like happen in every other YA book, but there were things that I've never seen done in YA before, and it was so freaking good. I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. So we're following this one girl. I don't remember her name. Alira. We're following Alira. Early in the book, a king from another realm comes to her family because she is a princess. She is royalty, and their realm is not doing so well. It's a very small land. It's just not flourishing anymore. And he wants to bring her to his land so that she can marry the prince there. And they'll form alliances and all that stuff. So it's a royal marriage. On her way to marry the prince, her handmaiden reaches out to this goddess, and the goddess grants the handmaiden's wish and swaps the handmaiden and the princess's body. Now, what I really freaking loved about this book was the main girl's response to this, because I feel like in most YA what we would have gotten was the main character being like, I want my body back, I want to be a princess again, I can't stand this. But what we got here was the main girl was like, cool, I don't want to be a princess anyways. I don't want to marry some random guy I've never met that I don't know if he's cruel or good. I'm sick and tired of my family taking advantage of me. I'm sick and tired of living my life hiding. So I'm just going to be a handmaiden now. And she, where the title comes into, takes the name Thorn and becomes a goose girl for the palace, where she helps take care of the geese. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And she basically just like gives up on being a princess. I will be reading whatever this author publishes, like no doubt. So with that, in the back of Thorn is a short story called The Bone Knife. And it is a short story that leads you into the sequel and helps you learn about the world of the sequel. I didn't really love it, but I mean, I'm not a huge fan of short stories. And it had some vampire themes, which I'm usually not a fan of. But Sunbolt had vampire themes and I loved that. So I gave it a shot. And I just really wasn't super attached to it. I don't think I mentioned, I rated Thorn 4 stars, although it like definitely could have been a 4.5, but it didn't quite do it for me. So I rated it a 4-star. The Bone Knife, I ended up rating a 3-star. It just wasn't quite for me, but it wasn't bad either. So 3 stars. Next, I read The Ravens, which I did a whole entire video on, so I will not be talking about it here. But I ended up rating it 3 out of 5 stars. Wasn't bad, wasn't great. It was what it was. And then I read 3 novellas that went along with the selection series. So I read The Queen, which is about the main princess, Prince Maxon's mother, as she goes through her selection, where his father eventually selects her. I read The Prince, which is about Prince Maxon right before his selection takes place, and it goes into when he first met the girls. And then the third one I read was The Favorite, which is about one of the girls that is selected and what she goes through during the selection, and she's not America. So I ended up rating The Queen 1 star because I thought it was absolutely disgusting, and I don't know how anyone expected me to like these characters after what I have learned about them in the selection. I thought that maybe I was going to understand a new side of them and start to root for them, but no, I was just disgusted, especially at the ending. It was gross. Then I read The Prince, absolutely fine, didn't add anything in my opinion, didn't take away anything in my opinion, 3 out of 5 stars. And then I read The Favorite, which I felt like added a little bit. It was a nice little touch, it was a nice little journey, but I didn't love it, so I also rated it 3 out of 5 stars. I like the selection, it's a guilty pleasure. Sue me? I actually reread those earlier this year sometime, 2020. So if you want to check those out, they're somewhere on my channel. I'm not going to bother saying that I'll link those because I will not do it. I know how editing me gets. She gets very annoyed after I link more than 4 things. After that, I picked up a book called Roar, which was a reread for me. I read it back in 2017, so before I had a BookTube channel, and I then picked up the sequel, Rage. So Roar is about this girl who is a princess, princess themed, and she is magicless. The whole entire royal line in all of the different kingdoms have magic and the peasants supposedly do not, but she is born magicless one day. And so her family needs to marry her to a prince from another land so that their kingdom will have magic, because the whole entire point of them having magic, the royalty having magic, is they protect their nation from these killer storms that come and attack, and they can collect these things called storm hearts, which help fuel their magic and help protect them and help bring strength to their nation. So they need her to marry a prince, like a second prince, so that he can come to their land and protect them, right? So she meets the prince she's supposed to marry, kind of becomes very infatuated with him very quickly, and then realizes about his dark past and who he really is and what he is really going to bring to their kingdom. She decides that she is not going to fall in line with what her family wants her to do, so she runs off with a band of storm hunters to figure out who she is, figure out who her people are, and figure out what magic really is in this land so that she can come back and be a better leader and be her own leader instead of having to marry this prince. So I really enjoyed Roar. I don't know what was up. I think this month I was really in a YA fantasy mood, but I enjoyed it more than the first time. The first time I rated it 3 out of 5 stars because I liked the plot, I liked the uniqueness of the story, the whole entire idea of these storms, and once you really learn about them and the different types of storms, it is so unique and so fresh, and I loved it. No one else that I have read has done something similar to this. And this time when I read it, I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. My biggest issue the first time was I didn't like the characters, and this time I actually didn't mind them. I don't like the main love interest. There's kind of like the prince, and then there's like a main love interest, and I don't like him. He frustrates me. And even in book 2, he did some stuff that I was really not okay with. But beyond that, I really enjoyed the book, so 4 out of 5 stars. And then book 2, same stuff. She did not let me down with this sequel. The third book comes out in June or July of this year, and I'm going to be picking it up and I'm going to be reading it. It was enjoyable. I also rated book 2 4 out of 5 stars, so heck yeah, I'm glad I read it. Right now on Audible, they are both free if you have an Audible membership, so I recommend checking them out and picking them up because I liked the audiobooks, I liked the books. They were good, they were enjoyable, they were very YA. Don't expect anything that's not YA if you're going into it, but like, they were great. Next, I picked up The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. So I've had this on my shelf for a good chunk of this year, and I finally got around to reading it, and I'm really glad I did. I enjoyed it more than I think a lot of people online are enjoying it. So I've been seeing some kind of like, not bad reviews on Goodreads, but just lower reviews, like a lot of 3 stars, especially for a YA fantasy. I was kind of shocked. A lot of people tend to love YA fantasies. This, we are following she is half black, half white girl in this Puritan time period. She finds this journal that was left by her mother. Her mother died in childbirth, and she finds this journal that links her mother to witchcraft. And she kind of falls down this rabbit hole of learning more about her past, learning more about witches, learning more about her society and how things aren't always, I hope you can't hear that freaking car alarm. Things aren't always as the white men of your society tell you they are. I really enjoyed this though. There were twists and turns, there was some darkness to it, there was some great characters, there were some unexpected twists when it came to the romance. I definitely thought from page 1, I was like, oh, those two are getting together. And eventually, yeah, they did get together, but it happened in such a way that I really wasn't like ready for it. I also really loved the message and the morals of this story and how it talked about the disgustingness of men at this time period. Unfortunately, that's the only way I can say it. There were men in here who had multiple wives and yet still were going and having sexual relations with 11-year-old girls. There were men who had beaten their wives, branded their wives, taken advantage of their wives. There were men who were making deals like, if you marry me, I won't persecute you as a witch and get you killed. Like, it was disgusting, but it was done in such a way that you knew that the author was also disgusted with it. And honestly, I was on the side of the witches the whole entire time. And while the witches do turn out to be not exactly what you're thinking they're going to be from the beginning, it kind of just shows you that not any one side is all good or all bad. There is good and bad in both. So I would continue on with this series. I don't know if I'm like super anxious to be picking up the sequel because I felt like it wrapped up really nicely and I don't need the sequel, but like, it was good. I would pick it up. I hope the author continues to write other things kind of similar to this because I really enjoyed it. Yeah, book. I rated it a 3.75 out of 5 stars because it just, the ending just kind of, I was going to rate it a 4-star through most of the book, but the ending just didn't quite grasp me as I wanted it to, so 3.75. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of room. So I'm going to go out of order for these last two because I want to end on a really, really high note. So the last book I read this year was The Immortalist, and I read this on my trip. I like buddy read it with some family members, and it was really enjoyable to read a book with some family members that I've like never done that with before. So in this, we are following 4 children. When they are children, they're all siblings. When they are children, they go to this, I don't know the politically correct term for this. Oh, yes, I do. They went to this Romanov woman. In the book, she is referred to as a gypsy, but I'm pretty sure gypsy is a slur. So they went to this Romanov woman and she told them all the days they were going to die. Oh, I still have my bookmark in it. Can get rid of that. And then we see how that information affects each of their lives. So it's kind of stuff like, if you know you're going to die early, do you go out and risk things more? Do you go out and try to live your life up? Do you give up your values and morals because you only have so many days anyways, and what's the point? Or if you know that you're going to live a really long time, do you put things on the back burner and do you not make decisions as quickly, and do you push off living your life? Kind of stuff like that. So I ended up actually really enjoying it way more than I thought I was going to, especially because it is kind of a saga, a family saga. It takes place over the course of like 40 or 50 years, and we follow the 4 children. Each of them gets like a chunk of the book. It's really sad, and there's lots of death, of course. There's lots of other trigger warnings that are included in this book, but there are tons of reviews and ratings on this book online. I'm kind of late to this party, so I won't be going super in depth with all of them, but by the end I ended up rating it a 4 out of 5 star. It was probably closer to a 3.5, but I really enjoyed the ending, so 4 out of 5 star. Can this go here? I don't know if this will stand. Ta-da! It stood. So before that, I read one other book, and it became an instant favorite. I'm actually considering rereading it in January. That's how much I freaking loved it. And that is The Troop by Nick Cutter. So this was also on my own shelf for a long time. I listened to the audiobook. It was so good. Oh my God. Oh my God. I was horrified. I was aghast. I cried. I screamed. Everything was correct. Everything was wrong. Everything was exactly what I wanted and exactly what I didn't want. And it was perfect. It was perfect. It was the perfect horror book. It has a lot of body horror, first off. So don't go into it expecting it to be like an easy breezy, beautiful horror. I mean, who goes into a horror expecting it to be good, I guess? I don't know. But it had everything that I wanted and loved from so many other horror books that I've read this year, and yet it like stuck the landing. So one of my biggest issues is the ending of horror books. A lot of times they just don't do it for me, but this one freaking did it for me. And if you don't like open endings, don't read this book because it has a huge open ending, but like, oh my God, it was so good. So freaking good. So in this book, we're following this small Boy Scout troop. They are on this island. There are 5 boys and their troop leader. Is it 5 boys? Is it 5 or is it 4? Oh my God, no, I'm not totally sure. I think it's 5 boys, but maybe it's 4. Okay, I need to stop. It's 5 or 4 boys. We're following them as they're on this island with their troop leader. And one night, while all the boys are asleep and the troop leader is awake, this strange man pulls up onto the island, and something is definitely wrong with him. Now, the troop leader is a doctor in his day job, so he takes the man in to try to help him. And then whatever is wrong with that man spreads. So I'm not going to go into what is wrong with that man because it is going to get into the spoiler category, but I really loved all of the explanation that Nick Cutter gave to us. I really loved how he built the horror, how we switched from POV to POV, and how we slowly learned about not only this disease, but about each of the boys and what was wrong with them, or what was right with them, or what drove them to make the decisions that they made. I couldn't put it down. I was reading it way past my bedtime. I was staying up late at night reading it, and then I woke up the next morning and I finished it that morning. Like early in the morning, I woke up to finish the book. It was so good. Okay, you know what? I think there were 5 boys. I don't know why I'm getting stuck on this, but I think there were 5 boys. If you can't tell, I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. It made it to my favorites list. I'm going to reread it possibly multiple times this year, if not in my lifetime. It made me lose my appetite. It made me scream. Oh my God, it was everything I wanted. And yeah, you know I'm going to be checking out other Nick Cutter books in the future. That's it. That's all of the books that I read this month. I am flabbergasted that I managed to get through so many books, and most of them were really good. I mean, I had a lot of 2 stars, to be honest, but a lot of them were really enjoyable books that I will think about and will be glad I have on my shelf. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I'd love to talk to you about each and every one of them, especially The Troop. I want to talk about The Troop by Nick Cutter. Please come and talk to me about The Troop. I want to talk about The Troop. I want to scream about The Troop. Anyways, I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you all in the comments. Bye!